joining in. This is the very first podcast, and the idea, hopefully, we're going to have Captain Pete Bethune Skype in with us in about 20 minutes. He's having some issues on the boat that they're on, so he may or may not be able to call in, but we'll see how it goes. Very cool. Hey, let's see. Oh, hey, Michelle. How you doing? Hey, Vic. Smoke already does sound nice. Hey, Camilla. Hey, from the UK. And Andrea. Thank you. Tanya and Michelle. Hey, awesome. Thanks, everybody, for joining in. So, like I said, hopefully we're going to have Captain Pete with us today. But one thing that I wanted to start talking about is plastics. Plastics start off with, we have a couple issues with plastics, that beginning on land and ending in the ocean. And one of the main issues is that in the plastics world, there's what's considered a closed economy and an open economy. The open economy is where the manufacturers will create the plastics, send them out, sell them, they're very cheap, and then we are left with, what do we do with them? Then there's the other side of it. There is what's called a closed economy, where some companies actually will take their plastics and recycle them back. So Hewlett-Packard's a good example. They'll take them, bring them back in, and recycle them. So there's, basically at this point, we have two different things going on. There's what's considered upstream, what's considered downstream. So the upstream are the manufacturers, and the downstream are the rest of us that have to deal with the leftovers. So there's a few different ways to attack it. So one thing that, I was really excited to get everybody together here. One thing I wanted to talk about was ways that everybody knows that they can help reduce their plastic footprint. They say it's a new plastic age. I was reading that there's so much plastic that they have the different layers of Earth, and there's so much plastic that we can't get rid of that they're considering that in the future plastic will become an encrusted layer on the Earth. So if anybody has any ideas or wants to talk about anything that we can do to save ourselves from being consumed by too much plastic. Oh, Corley, you can't hear me? Can anybody else hear? Let's see. Hey, can anybody hear me? Let's see. All right. Hey, Scott. Scott Countryman, guys. Scott is actually very innovative. Scott has created, low volume. Okay, let's see if I can increase this at all. Or so it's a little closer to the microphone. Is that a little better? If this is a little better, guys. I had to put earbuds in. Oh, geez. Sorry, I don't want. Let's see. Maybe this will help. Be careful with the earbuds. Hopefully, is this a little bit louder, guys? Is that better? Okay, it's the first one, so there's always bound to be some issues. So Scott is actually somebody that's very innovative. He's been trying to find ways to help coral regrow and to help save a lot of the reefs that are happening. A lot of the issues, bleaching and other problems that still low volume. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, let's see here then. Not coming in from Molly. Oh, okay. We're having some issues, guys. You know what? Let me see if this plays for you guys, and then let me know. This is the most famous PSA in America. This was a PSA where the plastic manufacturing companies actually got together and created a PSA that would shift the blame from the manufacturers down to us, the consumers. So anyway, a lot of you will probably remember this, but I wanted to, everybody's cranking it up. Right on, Vic. To play it like Quiet Riot. Okay, fantastic. It sounds like we're doing well. Hey, what's up, Claire? Hello. Glad you guys could join me. Okay, so anyway, now that the volume's set and we're back on track, I did want to say I spent some good time with Scott Countryman over in the Philippines, and he's very innovative. He works on plastic solutions. He works on pollution solutions and coral reef solutions. I'll put a link down to his site down there. You can check out his work. One of the guys that's on the front line making a big difference. Anyway, first thing I wanted to do was play the PSA that was put together by the littering companies. This was made by R.J. Reynolds. This was made by Coca-Cola. This was made by all the companies that actually are responsible for our pollution. So see if you guys remember this.
Some people have a deep, abiding respect for the natural beauty that was once this country. And some people don't. People start pollution. People can stop it. Write for Pollution Booklet, Box 1770.
Okay, so that PSA, I think a lot of everybody remembers that particular PSA. That was what happened is in 1953, Vermont decided that when all these companies switched to plastic bottling, that they were causing so much litter and animals were dying from eating the plastic, and there were so many issues that they were going to ban plastic bottles and make companies go back to glass bottles, which worked fine. You use the glass bottle, you bring it in, it gets recycled and comes back out. So to save costs, companies went to plastic. Then they started to become a problem. So Vermont decided, I'm going to pass this act. And when they decided that, they started to put it through legislation. So all the companies got together and shifted the focus from their use of plastic and the manufacturing of plastic to the consumer's ability to control the trash. So they actually termed the coin litter bug, which is a pretty famous term now. But it was created by Keep America Beautiful, which is a conglomeration of the companies that use all the plastics. So the blame was shifted from the manufacturers and the companies that create all this unnecessary waste back to the consumer. So it's kind of interesting because, what we have is a shift in consciousness from the 70s to focus on what we can do, and what we can do is very important. We have ability to not use plastic straws. We're all learning to not use single-use plastics. We're learning all kinds of ways to help mitigate what we are doing. But the problem is they're still creating tons of plastic, and all that plastic is ending up either in landfills or in the ocean, with over 8.1 metric tons entering the ocean. So there's a lot of issues here from, like I said, upstream all the way to downstream. So I was hoping, we'd all be able to talk about it. Hemp plastic, says Debbie. Hey, Debbie. Hemp plastic is great. And, the only slight issue with it is which polymers are used inside the plastic itself. But I think it is an amazing way to go. Now I have echo. Okay, so here we go. Hopefully the sound is a little bit better there. Hey, Heather. Heather is another amazing conservationist. They run the Dominion Tug up in Washington, and they work on conserving the history of maritime history with an old tugboat, and spent some time up there. It was awesome. It's good to see you. And you guys are always very conscious of what goes in the ocean, what goes in the water, and recycling. So, always great to see. Let's see. So what we're going to do is I wanted to show you guys, there's an interesting visual here. It's called How Plastics Enter the Food Web. And this is a fantastic thing because, they did a test recently and they found that plastics were not only found in every fish tested in the world, but they were also found in every human that was tested. So we all have little bits of plastic in us now, which comes from only 50 or 60 years of consistent ambush of plastic use. And so what happens is, a lot of times it starts off very small, and then it goes through the food chain and cycles out and ends up in the fish that people eat. So although I personally do not eat fish, I do always say to my friends that eat fish, be careful, make sure that your fish is safe, and the thing is it's very hard at this point to really find any safe fish. Maybe somebody has some comments here about this, and can update me as well. Because we are all here to learn. This is a conversation. The idea is that we all contribute to this. So if anybody knows sort of the status, I believe that fish in general have been compromised, although I'm not 100% sure on all the shells, oysters, and things like that. So again, if you have friends that eat fish or you eat fish, just think about, also that the larger the size fish, the more plastic they have ingested through the food chain. So it's another aspect to sort of consider, I'd say. So here we go. Hey, Debbie Culp. Debbie is awesome. She is an amazing activist down in Florida. Debbie does a lot of work to help people understand what's happening with BMAA and airborne contaminants as well. So Debbie's on the front lines. It's pretty cool, actually. Everybody that I see on here is all frontline warriors. So it's really it's an honor to have everybody here right now. I appreciate it, guys. We're going to talk about that. Gets into your food. So do not, like I said, it's something people don't think about, but microplastics are critical. And microplastics are in a lot of products. You can actually go to a website called beatthemicrobead.com, and again, I'll put that link in afterwards. And Beat the Microbead has a list of products from every country and will tell you if your product has microbeads or not in it. So you can see if what you're using may or may not be advertised to have microbeads, but could be very damaging. So, 1 second, here we go. Okay, you know what? It's Captain Bethune, but I have to tell him to call in on the other phones. So, cool. Call my Skype. You guys are getting to see behind the scenes, huh? Okay, let's see. And anybody that wants to call in, please call me, Eric E. Crown, at protonmail.com. Okay, so anyway, I decided to tell Captain Pete to come on over to my other Skype. And he'll be joining us here in a second, so this is going to be great. So, hopefully he'll be coming in here in a second. Now, Pete and I had traveled for quite a while. We spent a lot of time seeing trash in the middle of the Amazon, 1,500 kilometers way out there, to, all throughout Southeast, through the South China Seas while we were working down there doing some fisheries enforcement. Let's see, we should have him here any second, or I can maybe try to call him. Yes. Okay. So here we go. He's going to call in, and let me go ahead and get ready to receive him in here. And okay, here we go, guys. So one thing I did want to do actually is to play a quick video of one of our experiences out there that we captured. So let me just put that on for us while we get Captain Pete here online with us. And guys, it's interactive, so if you have questions for Captain Pete, please feel free to ask just right there in there. Okay. And there we go. So, here he is. Hold on, everybody. All right. Hello. Hey, okay, let's see. Let me get you on the screen here. And oh man, okay, let's see, 1 second. Where'd you go? In the ice source, okay. All right, here we go. We're just working to get you on the screen. 1 second. There you are. Okay, well, real quick, while we do this, I'm just going to play the video that we made of our plastics that we saw in down in the Philippines real fast, and then I'm going to get it set up, and we'll come back on live.
Yep, sure.
All right, here we go.
Back in Manila, and on this, we've been here for a month, right? And we saw so Eric, it's good to be back. Yeah,
How's the ship been doing?
yeah. I'm trying to think, how long ago was it you were in Bramerton? Must have been about 6 months now or something. Time flies, brother.
Yeah, it does. It does. I see you got a lot of tan, so you've been out working a lot, huh?
Oh, we were in Ensenada in Mexico. We're refitting the ship here. And yeah, we get a bit of getting a little bit of sun. Well, my legs are still quite white because we've got to wear long pants during the day. The yard. They're making us wear fluoro vests and stuff like that. So, but anyway.
So, and I'm very excited to have you on this one because this is the first episode and it's about plastics and all the plastics that are in the water. And we saw so much, craziness. to you has been kind of the most shocking, experience you've had with that you think with plastics?
Um, Man, there's so many shocking ones. I probably that time we had in the Philippines was a wake up call for me. I remember one time there was all this like flash flood water coming down the street, and all these people were using it as an opportunity to go tipping their plastics out or tipping their rubbish, which in the Philippines and like many countries, if you go through your trash, probably over half of it is plastic these days, and they were just tipping all their rubbish just going down. And then we had that time when we were just driving around Manila and like, holy shit, there's a whole creek bed here completely choked up with plastics, and it wasn't the only one. Then, half a mile further on, there's another one and another one and another one. And we I think in the West we can sit there frothing at the mouth over single-use plastic bags in supermarkets, and you look at how hard it has been to just get those one little item banned, and yet plastics are endemic all through our lives. And I don't spend a huge amount of my time these days working on the plastics in the ocean. There's plenty of other projects we work on, but it is staggering the scale of the problem. And for you to try and get those plastics out of circulation is very tough. They're cheap and they're easy. People like them. They're hygienic. So there's all these advantages with plastics, and the fact that it's choking up the oceans, that's far removed from your average person's everyday life. But there was another one actually. Thinking about it, when we did these patrols in the Losa jungle in Sumatra. So the Losa jungle has it's one of the last bastions for the Sumatran rhino, and there's a couple of very good groups doing patrols in there. So we went along to help one of them, and we were in a very remote part of this jungle, and the nearest village to us was about 80 kilometers upstream was the nearest village. So this is the Losa jungle is one of the most extraordinary jungles on earth, and there's a really fascinating story behind civil war in the northern part of Sumatra. This is so it's a province called Aceh, and they've had this rebel movement for about 30 years. And there was the rebel army was called the GAM. Captain out of that rebel army that was in this patrol unit that we were on, and he had fascinating stories about when they were fighting the Indonesian government. And anyway, what happened was the GAM was blowing up trucks, blowing up bridges. Any of the government forces that come in to try to put infrastructure in, the GAM would live in the jungle, come out and blow up their bridges and infrastructure. And so it became this province that got largely left behind in Indonesia. But as a result, it saved the Losa jungle because there was no road put in. So all of the elsewhere in Indonesia, it's been rampant logging, gold mining, deforestation. This one jungle in Indonesia remained largely untouched, and it was the GAM that basically that did this. But anyway, so there's no roads or anything through this jungle. There's around the outskirts, and what's happened is it's meant that the Sumatra rhino is its bastion is in the middle of this jungle where it's such a long way for you to get in that poachers can't get in there. They can poach on the outskirts of the jungle, but it's so big that they don't go getting in the middle. Anyway, back to plastics. So we were doing these patrols and we went a long way up this river in this little riverboat, and we were camped down on this thing, and I was camped with this hammock right beside the creek. The river was quite low at this stage, and I'm sitting there in my hammock and I'm looking out at this tree, and it's chock-a-block with plastics. And this man, you can it's a difficult to get to a place remoter. And I remember thinking all the way here, and upstream was a single village, a long way upstream through one village, right up in the headwaters, and that's where the plastics are coming from a single. And what happens is in the wet season, and flushes all the plastic down, and these trees are all littered with these little white bits of plastic, and not from one source. There's like packets that do rice packets and noodle packets and coffee packets and plastic bags and all the block with it. And then I was about 20 meters or 20 feet above river level. This river where that would be covered in the middle of the wet season, chock-a-block plastics. And if you put it in a remote place, imagine what happens in Western countries and other places that are chock-a-block with plastics. I've had so many episodes of plastics. Another one was when we were on I think it was the second Pacific crossing I did on a boat. And rope. It's quite dangerous when you're cutting rope off a propeller. A nylon rope has a whole lot of stretch in it, so it's waiting for that stretch to come undone. And you run the risk of when you cut the propeller, the rope hang, and this is a 3.5 foot propeller. You run the risk of it banging you in the head or something. I got down there with this little diver's torch and cutting away this rope, and sure enough, it goes bang when I go. But I was hiding behind the P bracket, but it's a nervous job to do in the dark. It happened a second time, and the second time was about an hour. I was like, fuck it, I'm going to leave it till daybreak, and then I'll climb down and do it right. So I went back to bed, got up an hour or so later, and I remember looking out, and there was all these little bits of plastic and fishing gear and stuff in the water. And so this is, up until then, I'd heard about the North Pacific Gyre, but I'd never been there. So geographically, this is between Hawaii and Vancouver, and there's like this big whirlpool. Hawaii and sort of San Diego, it goes that far south too, but it's this massive whirlpool, kind of about the size of Texas, and it gradually accumulates this rubbish. So rubbish from the west coast of North America, the current comes down there, and then it kind of sweeps out, so it goes around there. And then from Asia, you've also got a current that comes in and joins that whirlpool and goes round and round. So the North Pacific Gyre plastics, I believe, of any of the 5 gyres or 5 whirlpools. And it's a combination of North American plastics and Asian plastics. So anyway, I get up in the morning and we're in the middle of this North Pacific Gyre. And it wasn't like the plastic you could walk on. Like some areas of the Caribbean now, you can almost walk on the plastic so much. But it was all these, like a little wee bit of polystyrene, a bit of a cup, piece of a jandal maybe, quite a lot of fishing gear. A lot of the plastics in the ocean is fishing gear. But it was like maybe every 10 or 20 meters there's a piece. But that is the scary bit, is you take a cup of water or glass of water and you lift it out, and there's all these little particles in there, and the particles are plastic. And so all of the stuff that you see on the surface, that is not the problem. A big piece like that doesn't cause you so much problem. It causes problems with maybe like a balloon or something, or a piece of plastic. Turtle might eat it, seabirds might eat it, that sort of thing. So it does cause issues, but the real dangerous part is these very small pieces. So what happens is there's a thing called UV degradation. So UV light comes in, breaks down the plastic molecules, and then they get smaller and smaller. And so now you've got these microplastics that are floating around in the ocean, and those are what are entering the food chain. There's a fascinating link. I learned this from it was a lady, Emily Penn, who crewed on Earthrace for a while, and after she finished up with us, she went in and worked with 5 gyres and some other NGOs on plastics in the ocean. She explained to me, she said that there's these chemicals called POPs, or persistent organic pollutants. And what happens with these is they bond to organic molecules, or in fact, they bond to a carbon chain. So your organic molecules is a string of carbons with oxygen, hydrogen, and a few other things hanging off the side, right? Organic molecules is like that, and plastics are like that. It's a carbon chain with little bits off the side. That is what these POPs wish to bond with. So chemically, these POPs go around looking for all carbon chains to bond to. And so POPs are produced, and there's thousands of them that man has made. DDT, 2,4,5-T, the lubricants that go on your PET bottles, the chemicals that are used in the canning process of foods. They're used in all manners of electronics manufacturers. And of course, most of these in industry, they pump these into the waterway, and then they end up down in the oceans. And these molecules, they're going around looking for a carbon chain to bond onto, be it an organic molecule or be it a plastic molecule. So then they come across a little wee microplastic, and they go like, I'm going to hang out here. So it chemically bonds onto this plastic molecule. Now it's happening. Now it's quite happy. So these little microplastics, they gradually accumulate these POPs. Another type of them they have is called an endocrine disruptor, or put another way, it's a hormone disruptor. So one of these was, in fact, one of the chemicals that was used in plastics manufacture. and it caused it was a chemical that led to women reaching, or girls reaching, menstruation much earlier. I don't remember if you might remember about 10 years ago, there was this uproar because they had all these 10-year-old girls started to reach puberty, and they traced it back to these endocrine disruptors. And so these they can do all sorts of things. They can affect affect the hormones of organic beings like humans and dolphins. A great tragic story around dolphins in Florida, where they're accumulating so many of these chemicals, and the mothers are the chemicals. The only way that the dolphins get rid of these chemicals is through their milk, and so now there's very low, there's relatively high birth rates of baby dolphin in the Florida Gulf, but there's very low survival rates of the babies because they pick up all these toxins. So anyway, I go back to these plastics, right? The plastics, microbeads, and small plastic molecules accumulate these toxins. They become this toxic sort of broth. Then you've in the ocean, such as zooplankton. And zooplankton are like little wee animals that what are called passive feeders. They don't target specific things. They eat what is in the water. And normally that is a phytoplankton, which is like a little piece of algae, for example. So these zooplankton, they go eating a little bit of plastic, and they then accumulate the toxin that was in the plastic, and the POP molecule that was hanging out on the plastic. It's like, holy shit, here's organic molecule. I like organics even more than I like plastic. So they basically ditch the plastic and bond to the zooplankton. Now you've got this toxin which is in the food chain. The little wee zooplankton, he gets eaten by a thing. One of them that eats him is a myctophid, which is like a very tiny baby squid eating the zooplankton. And there's a thing called biomagnification. When you get toxins in a food chain and you go up a level in the food chain, there's an increase of typically between 6 and 8 times in toxicity. So the toxicity in the zooplankton was relatively low, and it is, say, 10 times or 8 times higher. Myctophid gets eaten by a little wee shrimp. Then it goes 8 times again. So now it's 64 times the toxicity. Little wee shrimp gets eaten by, let's say, a sardine. And now it's 64 times 8, 684, roughly the toxicity of the original zooplankton. That thing gets eaten by a tuna. Now we've got 5, 8, so now you're at 6,000 times the toxicity. And that tuna eventually gets eaten by a great white shark. Now you're at 50,000, 500, 500, half a million times. So that's biomagnification. So all these chemicals, that the plastics, like this link between these nasty chemicals that man has made and those chemicals impacting on the food chain and eventually coming in and impacting on man. In fact, it's sad. The only reason man is really starting to address plastics now is because scientists now are realizing actually there's this link in the food chain that is bringing our plastics and our chemicals back to us. And that's tragic. The only reason it's really being addressed now is because of that. But the sad reality is, so much wildlife in the oceans is being impacted in a massive negative way by the chemicals that man has made and by the plastics that we continue to consume and dump in the oceans. It's a very long answer, wasn't it?
No, it was great. That's exactly it. I mean, people never think, oh, my seafood's going to have some plastic in it. They never think, oh, there's any danger to the ocean. People very much take plastic and think of it in recycle or in a way more of a land-based concept, but never realize that it enters into their bodies. And like for my cancer, it's unexplainable where it came from. It could be from plastic pollutions. There's a lot of health issues with people that are unable to be explained because they have never looked into what these plastics are doing to us fully, and they're just now starting. And there's so many, there's like so many ways that people never think of plastic. One interesting one to me is like polyester. We send plastic to China, they reissue it, they make polyester out of it, they send it back to us. We buy the polyester and then we throw it away because we don't think of it as a recyclable piece of plastic element. So we're inconsequentially actually adding so much additional fibers and things that like we never really focus on. And so food is really a big one. When your travels, do you ever find anybody concerned about it, or does it seem to sort of be an invisible thing that just
Look, the plastics in the ocean, I believe it's reached a tipping point. I'll give you an example, would be Britain. Britain for a long time retarded in its pursuit of conservation efforts. Suddenly, Britain is on the map now in conservation. And if you go to London, there are so many NGOs focused on various aspects of conservation, and seeing the supermarket chains there, thankfully, starting to go addressing it in terms of removing plastics from shops. I've got a shop there now which is completely plastics free. And so I do meet people in most countries I go to now. There will be sometimes it's a lone soldier, some one man or one woman who's working away on it. But then you go to other places. So, for example, Germany for a long time has been very proactive in trying to remove plastics from their production cycles and things like that. Um, a lot of places I go to now, they've got great beach cleanups happening and stuff like that. And but the key to this in the long term is going to be how do we remove plastics from our everyday life? And plastics, if you go through and you add up the plastics that contribute a large amount into the oceans, you've got cigarette butts. You try and stop people smoking. That's a tough one. And the cigarette butts there is plastic in them, and it's a very cheap and easy source for them to make. So you've got cigarette butts, you've got tires. You want to try and stop an American driving a car, like tires, all of that. So as your tires wear out, those are plastics that are on the road, and then eventually they will wash out and end up in the water. There's no two ways about it. The tires that you burn does end up in the ocean. You're trying to stop that. Then you've got clothing. Clothing, it's only recently that they've started realizing, as we've gone to these different nylon, polyester, and other clothing, it's only now we're starting to realize, hang on, these microfibers go into our washing machine, then they go into the watercourse, and they do end up in the ocean as well. And they're already very small. You've got things like, for example, that they're just addressing it now, but those exfoliants, Procter & Gamble and various other people developed that had microbeads of plastics where the sole purpose is to be used once and flushed down your basin, into your sewage system and into the water. And there's no way a sewage company is going to form some kind of filter system that will accumulate your silly exfoliants that make your skin look slightly fresher or feel better or whatever. I don't know.
Right,
But
right.
the point I make, there you've got a global brand that has deliberately gone out and manufactured a product where the only place those plastics are going to end up is in the oceans. And thankfully now they've developed or developing alternatives to those. But it shows these things to go entering our food chain, and to try and stop those things is so hard. You see it in there's the trend for safety. So someone goes in and there's an avocado sitting in a bin, and they pick the avocado and they want to feel it to see if it's ripe or not. And I do it. I grab an avocado. I don't like getting one that's got a avocado, something to feel those bruises. Sometimes you do have to actually sort of touch it or whatever. So now to make them safer, they put them in polystyrene and plastic containers. And you go into some of the supermarkets now, and America's probably the worst for this. You go, everything's wrapped in plastic. It's like, come on, like now they wrap bananas in plastic, for goodness sake. You go in there and bananas have got great wrapping on them already, and now they're putting them in plastic. And
Yeah.
so these different drivers that are pushing us to use plastics, and there's a driver against that is this push to try and get rid of plastics. And there's these two things that kind of battling away, if you like.
You know,
Plastics companies, it's good business for them. They like to wrap everything in plastic, and they say it's safe. Um, human body, so you might have the germs from, someone else's hands. Look, people are prepared to go and eat their girlfriend's pussy and suck their boyfriend's cock, and yet we're not prepared to, hey, there might be someone else's fingerprint on this banana. Like, I think we need to get real about things in life, and bacteria, we get exposed to that stuff all of the time, and we shouldn't be insisting that all of our fruit and vegetables are wrapped in plastics because someone else may have poked their finger in on this banana or orange,
and that's actually an interesting thing too, because aside from the manufacturers adding it to the different products, like I saw an individual pepper just shrink wrapped in like a plastic, and I thought, well, what is the point of this? But then I don't use, because I learned this from you, I don't use the plastic bags when I go shopping. I'll grab avocados, put them in the cart, tomatoes, put them in the cart, everything goes in the cart natural wrapper. Nothing gets put in a plastic bag, and people look at you like you're crazy. You show up, and they're just like,
That is the funny thing is they they look at you like you're a freak show.
yeah.
But here's the interesting thing. Some countries not so much. For example, if you go doing that in Denmark or Germany, they're used to seeing that all the time. Not everyone does it, but you turn up there and you put your stuff. They're quite happy with that. But you go doing it in for example, there's plenty of areas in Los Angeles where you do it, and they're like, what? You're a freak show. But
Yeah.
to be fair, there's also areas of Los Angeles that are very proactive on this. Like if you go to Santa Monica, there's a very good green community there that is working very hard. So, I'm not pointing the finger at LA that are actually very good, but there's also other parts where there's zero consciousness about this type of thing.
Remember, I think we got a coconut, and the guy like chops it and tries to put the plastic straw in and tries to wrap it in the plastic bag, and you're like, no, 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 no. And you know what?
Yeah.
The other thing people never think about are two things I never thought about, even though I thought I was pretty conscious. One are contacts. Contacts are, remember, I had a bunch of contacts, and you saw them, and you were just like, whoa, and I never realized, I never, put together that one single-use thing, using the contacts, and it was unnecessary. And the other was plastic bottles of water, which when I started traveling with you, I would drink, and because I thought there's somebody who will recycle them. I can throw them out, everything's fine, somebody will take care of it. But then you start to learn that it doesn't really get recycled. Things that are biodegradable actually don't biodegrade naturally, and you start to learn. And by the end of it, I remember never being able to even accept plastic bottles of water anymore. Even that one day when somebody drank all my water on the boat, and we wouldn't stop and get one because it was really important. And after what you and I saw was plastic bottles everywhere.
It's something like I wasn't. I try and be accepting of different people in terms of the use of plastic or whatever. And I try and point people in the right direction. None of us are perfect. We all have a certain footprint tied to our life, but it has surprised me how hard it is to get. A lot of crew that come and work on Earthrace, they've got a good salvation conscience about them, and yet plastic water bottles are still a big part of so many people's lives. And I think part of it is driven where our governments have abdicated responsibility. So, for example, if you take the water supply in LA, it is shit. I will never, in LA, I will drink the tap water. I don't, because I'm not going to go out and buy damn bottled water. So I will drink it, but I don't live in LA all the time, and I might be there for a week and I hang out at Clark's place, and so I'll drink out of the tap water. But the LA water is shit, and I don't blame people for going out and buying it. So you've got this progressive governments that have come through and sort of put it out to, it's a local water supply company, and they let things degrade. They don't treat the water properly. They let it go through with all the crap. So people, and then it plays into the hands of companies like Nestle that do all the bottled water, Nestle, Coca-Cola, and all the rest of them, go taking the good water out of the ground so that it's not available to the local community, and then they bottle it, and then they sell all this plastics, and it is like trying to stop the tide. I'll give you a comparison as New Zealand, and in no way is New Zealand, in terms of conservation, amazing, but outstanding. And I remember probably about 15 years ago, where Coca-Cola first started trying to sell bottled water there. And he was like, why do we ever want this? But some Kiwis fell for it. And some Kiwis think that healthy than someone drinking tap water, because, in fact, there was many years ago, I had this date with a lady in New Zealand who was, and she was saying how bad it was to go drink tap water, and this woman had all sorts of health issues, and I said, look, I drink tap water all the time. Like, you're the sick one, not me. And I suggest it's a long story, but sometimes we kid ourselves that by having some super water purifier and the rest of it, that we're being very healthy, and at the next minute we're going out and eating a 10-pound steak and and a whole lot of other stuff that's really bad for us. We're carrying 10 extra kilos on our belly, and we're fussing about some water supply. Like, maybe you need to address the 10 kilos on your belly as well.
Yeah, no, a lot of
Which we know a bit about, don't we?
yeah, no, a lot of because I've been doing a lot of work with CBD now up here, and it's interesting because there's a lot of companies are supposed to be conscious, but a lot of time people don't think about sustainability. So they'll be selling these health conscious products in plastic containers. I'm glad because the guy that I work with uses all glass, and he's very eco conscious. So there's no, nothing, everything's organic but I mean, there's so much plastic. So it is interesting that we're entering this new realm of everybody is trying to get health, but people are still missing this one really important thing. Avoid plastic as much as you can, always.
Yeah, we're sort of addressing it on the ship at the moment. So I'm on this boat now, the Modoc, which of course you were crewing on for a while, and we're trying to get rid of plastics out of the system. So we've now got these bulk containers with all of the dried goods. We've got all these large glass containers so that, for example, the soaps, Thomas was bulk soaps, and make sure that they're not full of palm oil and stuff like that. And then those glass containers are in the rooms, whatever. So, but it's a never-ending journey. Like, for you to cut plastics out of your life, it is almost impossible. But you can go down this road of trying to reduce that and trying to be healthier and trying, we're all on this journey, and we're all gradually trying to make this change. Shifting the ship to bulk food has been a step in the right direction. Like, we invest in plastic containers and glass containers in the first place, but then there's very little plastic consumed because when the crew goes shopping, they buy all the stuff in bulk. And we've got the storage now to go using it rather than sitting having to buy individuals of all of these different things. They go in, and some places are more accepting of it, of you turning up with your, for example, you can go and buy bulk olive oil and turn up with the glass container that takes like a gallon of it, sort of thing, rather than buying an individual glass each time or plastic bottle or whatever. So, but none of us are perfect. We all have a footprint in terms of our consumption of fuel and our consumption of food and our plastics and all of these things. And I try and sort of encourage people to sort of, think about all of these things. Do you really need a big SUV? And, most people have got a big SUV. I need to tow my boat at Christmas time, or, they all have their reasons why they need the big car. And, sometimes I sort of say, maybe you could borrow the neighbour's one for that one trip a year where you need an SUV, But anyway, I don't.
It's true. It needs to be a longer vision. A lot of what we're looking at now is short vision. Like, okay, we're just going to recycle this thing today. But longer vision stuff, like people buying bamboo straws or stainless straws or silicone or some of the other or I was reading in Kenya, they banned all plastic. It's very innovative, and like here we have a single-use plastic ban, which, okay, to me it's not a very popular opinion, but I think it's kind of useless because all they do is now charge you for the bag, give you a thicker bag that's more plastic, and that more plastic is eventually going to end up in there anyway. So it's kind of like it might be a step in the right direction, but in LA, I haven't really seen it have a big impact that way. But I thought Kenya was pretty amazing because they banned it all.
Yeah, I think it depends on the price, in that plastics are convenient, and let's say the price was $5 a bag, then you're going to start to see. But if the price is like only 50 cents, a lot of people 50 cents. There's an interesting point. I remember many years ago I met a famous conservationist, and he picked me up from the airport, and he was driving I think it was an F300, like a 6.7 litre diesel engine SUV. This thing weighed like 3.5 tons. And I remember I sort of said to the guy at the time, I said, like, you're out saving the oceans. What about your car? And so I think as often we can get fixated on a single element, and and we think, hey, look, because I'm out working saving the oceans, I don't need to go thinking about the other things, and it's kind of the wrong approach. I think we just need to think about all of these things in our life, including plastics. Plastics is not the only thing we need to go considering, but it's certainly an important element. And as a marine conservationist, when I look at the damage that is starting to be done by plastics, it does need to be addressed. And going back to the plastics ban in LA, it does as a flagship issue. And so even though people, there's still a lot of consumption of plastic bags, and maybe the plastic bags are a bit thick or whatever, there is a certain ratcheting effect that happens here. And once you sort of stop the use of the very thin, cheap plastic bags, it does drive some people to go using the reusable bags. But we need to kind of keep the pressure up. And so, hey, like plastic consumption hasn't gone down in LA. We're actually consuming more because there's these bigger bags now. Let's ban the thicker bags and make everyone use those things. And, society gets dragged along kicking and screaming. There's people like you and I who will take our own bags in, but there's other people there who need to be led by the nose and bullied and coerced and pushed into it. And that's the challenge we face. And at the moment, I do feel that we have reached a tipping point in terms of public consciousness about plastics. And there are cities like LA that are pushing things in the right direction. I think Hawaii was quite progressive on that. It's often you find those very progressive states lead the way, and then it sort of drags other states along with them. A great example was California sets the standard in the US for emissions controls. And if a company like Toyota wants to sell cars in California, they may as well make the same cars for all of America. And so they introduce catalytic converters and other things. So big states like California can play a leading role in terms of pushing these companies to do it. Like if you're a company like, let's say, you're Nestle, who make chocolates, and California was turning around and say, right, Nestle, if you want to go selling these chocolates into our state, you are not going to use double plastic. So a lot of chocolates, for example, they have an individual chocolate that is wrapped, and then there's another wrapping around the outside. Do you really have to look too low? So if California introduced a law for chocolates that said you will not sell double plastic products into California, Cadbury's or Nestle, whoever, they're going to make it the same for all of America. So big states have a role to play in pushing these companies along the right direction.
It's a very good point, yeah, because once they have to make a change for a big population, it's not cost efficient for them to make two products. They may as well just convert it all over. So that's I didn't think about that aspect. That's a very good, very very good point. Well, and so now we've been mostly talking about plastics that we're all responsible for because society is built. You can't really escape them. But now I wanted to talk to you about the Modoc and the Modoc's mission, because you guys are going to go tackle one of the biggest plastic problems that people don't really talk much about, which is the lost or entangled or discarded fishing gear, whether they have to cut it loose in an emergency or they dump it, so they don't get charged when they go into ports or when to skirt around different regulations. So I know a lot of people are interested to hear about that. So I was hoping maybe you could kind of tell us a little bit about what you're facing and what your guys' plan is.
Sure. So we bought the boat. It's called the Modoc. It was built in 1944. It was a U.S. Navy tugboat, and it served in the tail end of World War II in the Western Pacific. It was over near Japan and Okinawa. It was involved in a typhoon rescue where a big typhoon came through right at the tail end of World War II and destroyed a bunch of boats, disabled a bunch of boats, whatever. It was involved in the search and rescue and recovery there. And then so it was a Navy ship, I think, for about 25 years, and then it was a US Coast Guard ship for about 25 years, and then it sat around for a while, and then a guy bought it up in Washington, and he converted it to a sort of a cross between sort of the Love Boat and Miami Vice kind of thing, and had sort of like plus velvet and stuff. And he was doing tourist gigs up to Alaska, and there's been various rumours around about there was this bunch of pilots that used to fly up prostitutes and cocaine and hang out on the boat. I have no knowledge whether it was true or not, but the people in Bremerton were adamant, like that boat was full of cocaine up and anyway. So we bought this boat. Yeah. So then there was a couple of captains up in in Oregon who bought the ship, and it's had around for a couple of years in Brampton, and then we bought the boat about a year ago. So we're just in the tail end of refit on the boat at the moment, and we're quite lucky on this. We've had sponsored. There's a company called Schiebel in Austria who make military drones and civilian drones, and they've sponsored a very big capable unit, a UAV or drone for us. But that's requiring a lot of modifications on the ship. And this UAV, you can fly this a couple of 100 kilometers away from the ship and have live video coming back to the ship. So it's a great enabler on things like illegal fishing. And at the moment, for example, if you want to go and patrol a particular waterway and look for illegal vessels that are fishing, you basically clock up miles. You sit in your boat, maybe you get on your radar. Your radar has a range reliably, maybe 24 nautical. But you need to go driving, and you get a ping on your radar. You need to travel over there and be probably within 3 or 4 nautical miles to get your eyes on them. Oh, it's legal. And, real it is. Most boats fishing in the ocean are quite legal. And so historically, you burn so much fuel finding these illegal boats or finding illegal fishing gear or whatever it is. So the UAV is a great enabler in terms of us, instead of having to clock up all those miles in our ship, we simply launched this UAV. And the UAV burns not a lot of fuel at all relative to what a ship does. So the UAV does all the miles. You can use it to gather the evidence of illegal fishing without them knowing. So you can sit this thing at 4,000 or 5,000 feet above the boat. You can zoom in. You can get evidence of them fishing in a marine protected area or engaged in fishing that's illegal. You get the registration, the GPS location, and the vessel's details. You get all that in a single piece of video, and that normally would stack up in a court of law. So now, before we've even gone near the ship, we have the evidence to prosecute it. Whereas historically, you let's say you get maybe 5 to 10 nautical miles away from a legal vessel. They see you on radar. You're heading straight for them. They stop their illegal fishing and they get away. So it should allow us to be a lot more effective in terms of finding illegal fishing boats and doing maritime surveillance and those things. So anyway, we're busy. In fact, I might be able to. I was going to show we're relocating the crane to the lower deck, and we were busy unbolting the crane yesterday. We've left just enough to hold it. Hopefully, in the next couple of days, we're cutting the hole in the deck, and the crane is going to be dropped down through the deck, and we're converting the whole top deck to what's called a flight deck, which is like a helipad, for want of a better term, and putting rails that will collapse out and stuff like that. So we're right in the tail end of the refit now. I think we've got the boat is out of the water. Let me just see if I can.
The side? I'm curious.
Outside, and
I've been watching the boat go through its phases. I remember being there in the early days, and it's amazing. It's so cool. You guys have that drone. I mean, it sounds like an enforcement dream.
So here's the crane that we're kind of using to shift our crane. Here's our crane here.
Nice.
Here's the rib. So this area down here, which is cluttered at the moment, that is what's going to be the flight deck. Then you can see looking down there to the side, we're on what's called on the hard or on the ground. This is the shipyard in Ensenada where we are at the moment. So anyway, that's what's happening on the ship. So we've got another 2 weeks here. Then we go. Then we'll be picking up this Schiebel S100 UAV, and then we've got another month of getting the UAV commissioned on the ship, and Larry and I completing our UAV training. So Larry did 5 months in Austria. I did over 2 months in Austria. That was this thing. And we have the final bit of training, which is happening in, I think it's happening in September. And then the ship is operational after that. So we've got, so a lot of our work these days is working with government agencies on protection of marine areas. So it's detecting illegal fishing, be it in a marine protected area or it might be foreign boats fishing illegally. And then the second part of the work we do is addressing things like discarded fishing gear in the ocean. So as an example, there's a whole lot of what's called ghost nets. So let's say a given vessel is putting drift nets across the Pacific. Every now and then they lose one, and these things might be a long way underwater. They might be 300, 400, 500 meters underwater. So one of the plans we have is you drag along effectively a grapnel hook a kilometre underwater. Excuse me. And if there's one of these nets there, you pick it up on the grapnel, you notice a change in pressure on your hydraulic system. So hey, we've hooked up on something. So then you pull it up, and here's another one of these ghost nets. So there's a lot of what are called ghost nets all across the Pacific. And then there's some of the gear you'll find on the surface. We fly the drone. Oh, here's another thing. And if it's there's an interesting thing that's happened on drift nets. Most countries have signed a drift net ban. So this happened about 25 years ago when there was a big uproar over drift net. So a drift net, just your way, a set net is where you will have a net, but it's tied to the seabed in some way, and or it might be tied to something on land or whatever. So those nets remain largely legal, but in the middle of the ocean, these drift nets that are like a massive wall, and the fishermen will often know of a migrating pattern that a tuna has, for example. So in the Pacific, you've got yellowfin tuna that cover large distances in a yearly sort of cycle around a certain area in the Pacific. The fishermen know about the cycles. They will lay this drift net as this massive line that will catch the tuna as they're passing through. But the danger with them is they're not just catching tuna. They're catching dolphin, they're catching turtles, they're catching seabirds, they're catching all manner of wildlife. And so for your one tuna you catch, there's a very high death toll of non-target species and things like seabirds that, what are we doing catching seabirds and all kind of thing. And so a lot of countries signed up to this drift net ban, but there's certain countries still ignore it. But the anomaly in the system is if they're in international waters, no one really has jurisdiction except for the country's state. So if it's a North Korean vessel, the only people that could do anything to address that in reality is the North Korean government. And the North Korean government has no intention of going and reining in North Korean vessels that are earning hard-earned foreign currency by catching fish. Another example is there's quite a few Chinese vessels still engaged in drift net fishing. The Chinese government has no intention of addressing that in any way, shape or form. But here's the catch on it is the fact that no one really has jurisdiction also means, like, let's say we find one of these illegal fishing nets, just pull it in and take it, and bring it in and send it to a plastic recycling yard or something like that. So that, our plan is if we come across these drift nets in the Pacific, the fact that no one really has jurisdiction will allow us to go pulling these nets in, and So we do have one.
That people are just nobody's out there doing that.
Yeah, one thing too with these ghost nets, enormously destructive. I remember we pulled in one. In fact, we ended up having to give up. We spent 2 days working on the drift net. This is back on Earthrace, and we pulled in probably maybe about 2 kilometres. It took us a couple of days. We just didn't have the equipment for it. Whereas on the Modoc, we will have the winches and everything to go pulling this gear in. But we spent 2 days pulling in a drift net and had all sorts of stuff in there, turtles and seabirds. There was no dolphins, but man, it was, and skeletons and things. So this thing had been in the ocean for, I don't know whether it had been in there for a year or 2 years or something like that. It was all covered in algae or whatever, and it had become like this whole microcosm. Like there's all these little fish hanging around, and as we're pulling it out of the water, there's all these smaller fish. So it had become like a fish, almost like a fish aggregation device. But within this net was so much destruction, and so the team's quite keen to go and pull out all the nets in the ocean, but we can at least go, making a very small dent in it. Just go back to plastics. We have one project lined up. Which is this place called Henderson Island, which is it's classed as it's by Pitcairn, and it's classed as the remotest island on Earth, in that it is the furthest away from any major city. And it's in the middle of nowhere. Like if you head from Chile, you go out from Chile, you'll come to Easter Island eventually, and halfway between Easter Island and Tahiti, or it's sort of on a triangle with New Zealand, is this island called Pitcairn, and then a certain distance from there. So Pitcairn there was a famous boat called the Bounty that the sailors on the Bounty mutineered. So that there was a Captain Bligh, who was the captain of the vessel. His crew mutineered, and the crew basically put Captain Bligh into a little wee dinghy, shoved him off, took the boat. They went back to Tahiti. They got some young women from Tahiti who wanted to go and hang out with them and be pirates. So these are genuine pirates now, because stolen this boat. Anyway, they went and landed on this island called Pitcairn, which is very close to Henderson Island, and they're still there today. So the I think one of the guys was Fletcher Christian, and his great grandson is now a senior figure. I don't know if I've got the right number of greats or whatever in that. But anyway, so Pitcairn Island is a space. I think it's only got about 40 or 50 people on it that are descended from the original pirates, and the reason they managed to remain afterwards, the British Navy was trying to find them, and so there was a big manhunt conducted down in the South Pacific to try and find where are these pirates gone who mutineered, because Captain Bligh survived. He managed to get back to civilization. Anyway, the Pitcairn Island, its location was something like 100 or 200 kilometers out in the charts. And so the Navy couldn't find this, and they thought Pitcairn Island might be a place they would go, but they weren't able to find it again. Whereas the bounty men did manage to find it. And anyway, they all went and landed on this island, and this was like 18 something, I presume. They all went and landed on this island, and then there was a group that started to have second thoughts about it, and they wanted to leave Pitcairn and go and hand themselves over to authorities, but lead a normal life, probably after a certain prison sentence. And then what happened was, so they were going to leave the next day. During the night, the boat mysteriously burnt to the waterline and sank. And now, in the waters outside of Pitcairn, there are still the remains of the original bounty boat that has been sunk there. So anyway, going back to, so the plan is there's been several groups have gone to this island and done beach cleanups. So this island, not Pitcairn, but Henderson, which is a ways away, it's famous for two reasons. Well, not famous because no one really knows of it, but it's two calls to being semi-famous. One is it's classed as the remotest island on Earth. The second is it has the highest concentration of plastics on a beach of anywhere on Earth, and yet it is the remotest island on Earth. And so what happens is it's in the middle of the South Pacific Gyre. It's got this current moving by it all the time, and that is dumping plastics on the beach. And so there's been several beach cleanups have happened there, but all of this rubbish is now, all of the plastics is contained within bags above the high tide mark. So someone needs to go there and get all this plastic and get rid of it. So on the Modoc, I think someone told us by the time we get there, there's probably going to be about 100 tonnes of plastics to be taken off this island. And it's a small island; it's not massive. So anyway, that's one of the projects
in the world has the most amount of plastic trash. That's
it's extraordinary, isn't it? Yeah. It's extraordinary.
That's crazy, and what a great example too of how this is a huge international issue. So many people say, "Oh well, my country's doing this or that, and my country's doing this or that," and in reality, we still need a bigger effort. I think internationally.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I get optimistic about the future is you see so many people today starting to go looking at these things, and different people, they all champion different things. In some ways, you could say like since you've gone off and done this thing about chemicals and leading to cancer, and you've had cancer in your life, which has impacted you quite considerably, and you've got your cause. And I remember a few years back I did a TED talk, and I talked about people need to have a cause. If the greatest thing you do in your life is produce a couple babies and lead a good life, I say that's not enough. Like the world has enough babies. And I like to sort of question people and say, is the world a better place with you having been in it? And 90% of the population cannot say yes. The price, if you take the price the planet has paid for Eric E. Crown to live on here for your 40 odd years is pretty high. Like in terms of your consumption of food, your fuel, all of these things, Crown and Pete Bethune and all the rest of us, there's an obligation to pay it back. And I like to think that I'm doing my best to pay it back. And, I don't say people have to have the environment or marine conservation as their cause, but I like to push people and say, you need to have a cause that is bigger than just you or your family. I remember I gave a talk a few years ago to a group of, they call them C executives. So it was CEOs, CFOs, and COOs. A lot of people won't even know what that is, but anyway, it's like senior executives in a company who I mix with it occasionally. So anyway, so there was a group of about 30 of them in this room, right? And so I said to the group, I basically put the question to them, I want you to have a think about what is your greatest achievement in life. And the first, I said, tell me about yours. And he said, "Oh, I've raised two amazing kids." And I was like, "Really? Is that the best you can do?" I said, "The world has 7 billion people on this planet already, and you've just contributed two more." And he's sort of like, "Yeah, but they're great, outstanding citizens." I was like, "That is obligatory. Do not come telling me that your greatest achievement is to raise two great kids.
Yeah.
Like, you need to do more than just that." Of course, so then I went to the next guy, and he came up with something, and then one of the guys said, "Oh, I employ 400 people," was the thing, and like that's he said, "Hey, that contributes economically or whatever," but it's really like you're making a lot of money. Like, this guy was worth about 50 million, and so he'd made his money out of employing those people. Like, he didn't employ the people out of the goodness of his heart; he employed them as a way to become one of New Zealand's wealthiest men. Um, and eventually there was one guy who'd been involved in a project that had been supplying clean drinking water in Africa, and they'd built a whole lot of wells that were deeper than what the standard wells were, and that were funded by a bunch of non-profit. I said, now we're getting somewhere. And anyway, so you might think that me going in and stirring up those people, may not lead to anything. But I did have a guy reached out to me about a year later, and he was the CFO of a big New Zealand company. Anyway, he messaged me and said he'd quit his job, and he'd gone to Central America doing some conservation work.
Wow, really?
And so, if I can
Nice.
convince the odds, a lot of those guys, and there were a few females in there as well, really competent. Like, for you to be a CEO of a business that turns over 100 million a year, you've got to be really good at making stuff happen. And if we can get a few of those people to come over and start working on conservation, or working on human rights or animal rights or these other things, that's a great result. And it's not to say that they're the only people who can make things happen, but in my work, I do find you get people who, there's a continuum of effectiveness, from people who struggle to tie their shoelaces in the morning. You do not really want them crewing on your boat, because if they struggle tying their shoelaces, how good are they going to be in making stuff happen for me? Right up to the people who are super effective at making stuff happen. And I find in my teams, I try and get more of the really effective people who can make stuff happen. And I think as conservationists, if we can look to start bringing in some of those companies and some of those very, very talented people, put your talent, instead of going out there and making lots of money for your company, come and do lots of good for the planet. I think that's a good thing.
I like that, and it's true. A lot of times they're just painted as the adversaries or the bad guys, but in reality, everybody has to walk this very difficult position where we have to live in society, we have to make money, we have to live in the economy, but at the same time, we have a human economy and a nature economy. And a lot of people get rid of human and nature economy to focus on financial economy. And, a lot of those people are successes in that realm, and it sounds like it's great because you open up that option for them to bring back in nature, bring back in human economy, and bring back in emotional economy, and find that balance, and we need people on every level.
Here's a point for you. I was, many years ago, I was part of a team called Sea Shepherd, and we went down to Antarctica and sort of tried to stop Japanese whaling and a few other things. But here was, when I looked at the results in terms of stopping whaling, I think the campaign and the subsequent ones did lead to it kind of forced New Zealand, Australia into court action against Japan. Eventually, Japan lost. But the greatest thing to come out of that, when I look at all of those people who have gone on and done great conservation work and other NGOs, some of them have formed their own NGOs. But the hard part, often people's eyes need to be open. Like, you do not need to lead your life buying shit and consuming shit and spending your life earning money to buy more shit and to consume more shit. And sometimes it takes an NGO like Sea Shepherd, who takes these volunteers away, and some of them pay and some of them get no pay and some of them actually get paid to go and do these campaigns. People's eyes need to be open. Like, you do not need to spend your life earning money to buy shit. But it's hard for people to make that transition. And here's one of the reasons. If I was to ask you, how many ads have you seen in the last week telling you not to buy something? I would suggest probably none. Or in your circle, maybe, there might be the odd thing coming through. Don't need this. But at the same time, you've been exposed to probably 1,000 ads telling you you need to own this car, or you need to buy this special supplement, or you need to have this to be super healthy, or whatever. You get sold so much stuff. All these messages coming in to tell you to buy stuff that'll make you happy. And so it's hard for your average person when they get bombarded with all this stuff to step outside of that, because they think, oh, geez, I'm not going to be happy if I don't have a car. Look, I haven't had a car for about 10 years now. Occasionally I still drive a car. We've got a car that, we've rented a car here for $10 a day that, I go and use it occasionally, but we've got a team of 15 people here and we have one car between us. We do not need lots of cars to go driving us around. And every now and then it's a hassle and I've got to go and use an Uber, or I jump on these little buses here, 15 pesos. It's not even $1. 15 pesos. You get a bus into town. It's a 15-minute ride to get into town.
In Mexico, you get insurance too. So if the bus is in an accident, you're actually medically insured. I believe so in Mexico,
nice. Yeah, okay. Anyway, the point I make is that it's not easy for people to step outside of being just consumers. We're, in many ways, much of society is set up to simply be cows that the industrial complex can milk. And we buy cell phones and we buy food and we buy all this sort of stuff. But we sort of, in many ways, your average person is milked by the system to make other people wealthy. And it's not easy to step outside of that. And so one of my roles that I try and do is I try and encourage people, you don't need to follow that recipe. Like I'm not saying you're a bad person or wrong. There is an alternative. And that is find yourself a cause and find something that's bigger than you and find a way that you can sustain yourself in doing that. And that's the hard part. If I look at you with your gig now, you're starting a podcast, you've done a little documentary or whatever, I guarantee, and I don't know this, but I guarantee the hardest thing you have is funding yourself. How does Eric E. Crown raise enough money to go doing his very valuable documentary about cancers and chemicals in the water and biosphere that industry's putting out on those things? It's really hard to go funding that work. And many of us in conservation and animal rights and human rights, the hard part is always the money. But it is solvable. And if you work hard enough at it and you come up with a good plan and you bring a good team around you, or you're effective at making stuff happen yourself, it can be done. And it's a much more rewarding life than simply being a consumer and going and buying shit.
It's perfectly said. I mean, even as I was working in the entertainment industry before I started traveling with you over the last, about 2 years that we traveled, 2017, 2018, I can't even get back into it now. I'm stuck. I can't reintegrate, it's just because everything that everybody wants around me is so different than the things that I'm interested in doing each day, and it really did, turn on. And plus, when we would travel, nothing would stop us. If we found an illegal vessel, if we had to stay up all night and watch them and then bust them in the morning, we did it. Whatever it took, we did. And that was something that I walked away from Earthrace with that made a big change and made me say, you know what, I need to go out there and do my thing because, everybody needs to bring up their voice and everybody needs to bring their story, their perspective, and their call to action up there. So, it was a big thing. And traveling and seeing these issues on a worldwide level really made a big difference. But also seeing that there's a different way to live, even just the basics of not buying bottled water, carrying water with you, or getting it when you can, or boiling tap water instead of grabbing a thing of water, which we did in some places. We drank a lot of water. I think people would be afraid to drink, but it's all better than adding one more piece of plastic, to their.
Part of that. Here's an example of that water thing. I had a couple of former Marines that came with me on a number of patrols, and they turned up with their water filtration systems. And I remember Costa Rica also happened in Sumatra. Like the water there is way cleaner than in pretty much most places anywhere in the world. And sure, it's coming down through a jungle, but man has evolved drinking that kind of water. So anyway, we'd turn up there, and these guys would be there at their little water filtration system, and then they'd put their iodine tablets in, and then they'd wait for half an hour. And it started to affect our patrols, and that we had to be cognizant that these guys, they would go through a lot more water than others as well, but they were big muscly guys, and they would go through them. But I remember thinking, and so me and the rest of the rangers, we were all just drinking the water straight out of the stream. But what I'm getting at is doctrinated that you need to have filtered and chemically treated all this water that comes through these factories or whatever. But you don't really. Like our bodies are perfectly equipped to go drinking this water out of streams and stuff. And in New Zealand, we're lucky. Our streams aren't perfect, and there's dairy and other things that are starting to contaminate them. My brother will hate me for that. My brother's a dairy farmer, and dairy itself starting to cause a few issues. But anyway, we've been convinced we need to go drinking bottled water or have water that's purified and whatever. We don't really. And there's the occasional case that, one example of it, one person gets Giardia and the next 1,000 are not going to drink any stream water. And there's plenty of people who had Giardia and live to tell the tale. How many people die of Giardia a year in the West? Not many.
Yeah, exactly. Not worth it to be, But people love the story of fear over here. They're always wondering what they should be afraid of.
Hey, you remember you mentioned before about that stuff in the Philippines. Do you remember the mango of disappointment?
Yeah. Oh, the mango of disappointment.
Oh my God, when you talk about long nights, I remember that night. For those of you who don't know, so Eric was involved in helping us in the Philippines on some illegal fishing stuff. So he was making these cool little videos, and we would sort of stream the odd one live and stuff as well. But anyway, there was this purse seiner fleet that we caught inside municipal waters, and a highly illegal purse seine fleet. These were big ships, and I don't remember the numbers, but it was probably a fleet of 10 to 15 boats, most probably. And the guy we were with, he got all scared, and it was kind of a late night. We were out there till probably midnight, and we'd be out there till morning, busting these boats. And anyway, then the guy, he chickened out basically, and he came up with some excuse. We had to go back in to get police support, and of course then the police didn't want to come out with us. And this guy had jurisdiction, and it was I look at sometimes I find you spend those long days at sea and long nights doing patrols and clocking up miles and inspecting boats or whatever, and then here we had this, I found this is Christmas here, we're going to bust 10 boats tonight, it was big ships, and then the guy chickened out. And it's funny when I look at this gig, how you have some shitty nights like that, but then you'll get another night, like I don't know if you remember that. There was that fleet we busted in the Philippines, which was 15 boats in total, I think. And sometimes you get a victory like that comes along the way, but you don't win you don't win.
It's true, and like you always told me, you have to really savor the victories in conservation because they're far and few between. But if they're worth it, each one is so worth it. Yeah, that night that we busted those 15 boats was amazing. Just go to this boat. Are you our boat with the captain? No, it's that one. Okay, we'll go to that one. we were just tagging them on and on and on until we got to them. But and people don't, and I would say to people, illegal fishing, and they'd say, well, what's that mean? It doesn't. A lot of people are still even confused about that. And what I found is, the amount of tonnage of fish that they were taking out of tribal waters, where they were taking the fish from the people that had the right to it. It's crazy. The amount of illegal fishing is, causes so many issues. Although the fishermen,
I think that boat, did we estimate they had 20 ton? I think they'd taken that morning. That was one of the boats, and there was 3 purse seiners there. So you'd say multiply by 3. That fleet was taking 60 ton in a day, and they'd been there for a month. By that. So 60 ton getting taken, and then the worst thing about it, I thought, was those local boats that were going out there and sort of scavenging around the sides, like trying to just getting the odd fish that had been sort of killed and squeezed out of the net or managed to jump out. Like the locals were, they'd become beggar fishermen.
It's true. They were just lined up on the side waiting, and it all comes back to the ocean sort of being our, for a long time everyone thought it was such an unlimited resource, and now we're all starting to understand it's very limited, and how do we all move forward? Which brings me actually to something I really wanted to ask you. You had mentioned being in Sea Shepherd anti-whaling campaigns. For most, I'm sure everybody that's on here knows Captain Pete, but he actually his boat was smashed and run over by the Japanese whalers while he was on the campaign with Sea Shepherd. Then the boat sank, and then Pete actually went over and boarded the Japanese whalers' boats and demanded a bill for your boat to them, as I believe. And then, of course, you were arrested, spent months in Japanese prison, all to make the conversation about whaling the conversation that was in the press. And so what I'm curious about is now they've just said, we don't even care, we're just going to go whale anyway. What do you think about the Japanese now resuming their whaling and the way that they've done that?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me about my ship sinking. That's great. So, look, here's the thing. You mentioned before about we need to celebrate the few victories we get in conservation. And I remember I was in prison in Japan when Australia announced their court action against Japan that took them to the International Court of Justice. That took 4 years to reach its conclusion. Japan lost the case. Then the following year, Japan didn't go down to Antarctica. I see that as a small victory. Then they resumed their whaling, but with a quota of a third of what they had before. So previously, they would take up to 1,000 whales a year. They cut it to 333 as part of their new scientific whaling program. So that is a small victory. It's not perfect. They're still taking 300 whales, but it's much better than 1,000, right? But what happened was it took about another 3 or 4 years, and then Japan announced a total withdrawal from whaling in Antarctica. So today, Japan does not whale in Antarctica anymore. That is a victory, no two ways about it. They have resumed commercial whaling in their own waters, and I don't like it, but they have a legal right to go doing whaling in their own waters. Just as the Eskimo or Inuit people, they conduct what you would consider to be relatively sustainable whaling up in Alaska. I don't like it, but I'm not about to go and protest the 1 or 2 whales that they get a year, and I don't know the exact details of it. But America's involved in whaling, Iceland, Norway, Greenland, these countries are all involved in commercial whaling in their own territories, and that is a more complex issue. Japan was whaling in international waters or in the Antarctica, in the Antarctica whale sanctuary, and that is why it caused me a lot more consternation that Japan sneaks past New Zealand each year and went whaling south of us into waters they have no history of whaling in, into waters, and they were in breach of so many international laws and treaties. So here's an example: in Antarctica, you're not allowed to bunker fuel, so you're not allowed to transfer fuel from one boat to another, except a tender vessel. So a tender vessel, you've got a little wee rib, you're allowed to refuel that, but they would have a tanker come to Sun Laurel or something, is one of the tankers they use, drive right into Antarctica, and they're bunkering fuel from one vessel. That's illegal. You're not allowed to discard any waste into Antarctica. They would process up to 1,000 whales a year. All of the offal is pumped back into the ocean. All of the offal from those, so they take a typical whale, let's say an average minke whale weighs maybe 3 or 4 ton. Out of that, they will keep, say, 1 to 2 ton of flesh. The other 1 to 2 ton of offal and bones, whatever, is simply pumped overboard. And that's totally illegal. Regardless if you consider you're putting it back into the food chain, it is totally legal. They were hunting sei whale, which is protected under CITES. The whaling in what is a whale sanctuary. And the problem with the whale sanctuary, it's complicated, but the IWC was effectively a toothless mechanism that had no method of enforcement. So Japan was in breach of so many international laws and treaties in whaling in Antarctica, and that made it a more of a prime target. Now they've gone back to whaling in their own waters, and now I guess they're accepting, hey, it was always commercial whaling all along. We're going back to that, and at least they're not whaling in international waters anymore. I don't like the fact they're whaling in their own waters, but I've got plenty of other campaigns that I'll be doing before I'll go targeting them whaling in Japan.
So that's So I mean, that must feel
one of the
good
things in
then,
conservation, Eric, is you've got one of the things is you kind of got to pick your targets. And I have a lot of people, every day I'll get messages from people, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you getting that? you've got to be very specific in what you're going to target. And much as the number of people who message me, why aren't I in Taiji? There's already 50 activists in Taiji. Does Pete Bethune make a difference there? Probably not. And so I encourage people to find their own campaigns. And no disrespect to people who go to Taiji, but I have a lot more respect for someone who goes and discovers the island in the Caribbean that is still hunting orca. There's a great target, not on the conservation map at all. Man, there's an island in the Caribbean targeting orca. Man, there's a good campaign for someone to go and spend some money on. But don't come and tell me I should be doing it. Why don't you go and do it? You need to go and find a way to fund yourself and go and do it. And so I'm forever trying to encourage people who send me messages saying, why don't you do this, why don't you do that? No, why don't you do it?
I like that, because I was going to ask, if you had sort of advice for, people that want to try to help but aren't sure what to do, but it is really that simple. It's like, find something that you're passionate about and find a way to make a difference.
Here's the thing. There's three main ways you can get involved in, be it conservation or pursuing the cause that is dear to you. There's three mechanisms, in my understanding, you can use. One is you simply join an NGO that supports the sort of issues that you care about and maybe has a culture that suits you. So you might, for example, join Greenpeace or Sea Shepherd or Earthrace or someone else. So if you want to get involved in marine conservation, man, go and meet some Sea Shepherd and see if they share the same culture that you kind of have or that you want. And so the advantage with joining another NGO, they generally do the fundraising, and so you might be able to go on and be a volunteer on a ship that goes to Antarctica or goes to the Sea of Cortez and works on the fajita or whatever. So you can join an NGO that does things. The second option you have is and so that's as a volunteer or something like that. The second option is you can actually get a job in some NGO. So, for example, Greenpeace, at their headquarters in Amsterdam, I think they have something like 200 people fully employed and paid counts very good wages. And so, and the advantage with that is you're getting paid to follow your passion and to go pursuing conservation. We're partnering with an NGO in Mexico at the moment, which is I believe the largest conservation NGO in Mexico. They've got a whole bunch of paid salaried employees who, great people doing great work, and it's great to see people getting paid. I despair at these people who expect because you're a conservationist, you shouldn't be paid. Like, if we get paid and we provide a good service or whatever, I don't have a problem with it. If you manage to make that happen. There was criticism of Rick O'Barry a few years who criticising him for drawing a salary, and holy shit, the guy has spent probably the last, I don't know the numbers, but the last 20 years protecting dolphins around the world, and you expect him to be a total pauper because of it. And Rick O'Barry's not a wealthy man. He lives very humbly, and I got no problem with him getting a little bit of money. And in my case, I haven't had an inland revenue, my yearly thing, for 10 years. I haven't drawn any salary or income. I've had my expenses paid, but I have zero assets outside of a little bit of tactical gear. I mean, interestingly, my daughter, of having a deadbeat dad, well, she didn't say deadbeat, but a dad like me who earns no money, is that it means she can get the maximum student allowance in New Zealand to go to university. So, it has its pluses. So anyway, going back, the point we're working to. So one option is you volunteer at an NGO. Second option is you get a job at an NGO, and sometimes the second one can follow the first. So you go and work at someone like Sea Shepherd, you volunteer on a ship, you become a captain, then a lot of the captains in Sea Shepherd do get paid, the engineers get paid, and things like that. So those are two options. The third option is you find a niche, and there's a number of great examples of this. So Rick O'Barry has done it. He has created this niche around dolphins. His thing is dolphins, and he kind of owns that. Like, if you start talking about dolphin conservation around the world, the name that continues to pop up, Rick O'Barry and the Dolphin Project, and they've done a fantastic job of promoting the issues of captivity of dolphin, and all credit to them. But there's 1,000 other niches out there. I met a guy it was at a conservation event 2 years ago, and he was working on saving frogs in Africa, and he'd created this niche, and it was a hard niche because he explained to me. He said no one cares about frogs, and frogs are very vulnerable, super vulnerable to chemicals. Like their skin absorbs chemicals very easily, and so a lot of frogs. So, for example, frogs in many parts of the world that are close to society, they all have issues with getting all sorts of deformities and problems because they absorb chemicals. They're very easily killed off, and a lot of farm areas and all around the world where they start to use pesticides and things, frogs are very vulnerable. So anyhow, this guy created a niche around frogs. In some ways, you could. And the advantage with creating a niche is that you can kind of own that space. And there's Jane Goodall, who's created a great niche around her thing around the gorillas. She's an absolute rock star. You start talking about gorillas, and she is the one that comes to mind, sort of thing. So the advantages with it is that you work on the cause you believe in, and you set the culture that you want to have in your organisation, and that's sort of the route that I've tried to take in my thing. But I go back to what we talked about earlier. How do you go funding that? And in my case, for a number of years, we had the television show funded our work. So we got, a season of The Operatives would pull in about a couple of million of dollars, and we would use that to fund those missions. And having a big chunk of money that you can go investing into missions allowed us to tackle a lot of targets that we couldn't have otherwise. I remember, we had this warehouse under surveillance in the Philippines, and we spent probably about 6 weeks with this place under surveillance. If I was just little Pete Bethune without a TV show, there's no way I could have afforded to have all of those men working at night, having that place under surveillance. And the end result was we did close down a wildlife smuggling ring. So it was worth it in the end. But if I didn't have the television show, I couldn't have gone funding that. And then, sometimes you sort of need to recreate yourself. But
Huge
anyway,
victory though,
finishing that,
man.
3 ways that I reckon you can go and work in conservation. One is you join an existing NGO as a volunteer. Second one is you may be able to progress up the food chain and get a job in an NGO where you're paid. And the third one is you need to find a niche or create a niche for yourself that allows you to kind of do it. Some people on the volunteering side, they do it by still continuing with their existing career. So for example, quite a few guys who do it are cameramen. So they get a job at Animal Planet, $600 a day being a cameraman on, filming Deadliest Catch. They go making their money for 6 or 9 months a year. Then they go out and spend 3 months doing cool conservation work or whatever it is they're passionate about. So sometimes people can do it by having an existing career that funds them, and then they go and volunteer or do their own kind of thing around that.
It's always a challenge, huh? It's always a challenge. But when that passion burns inside of you, you always find a way.
Yeah, well, and something we talked about earlier. If your biggest priority in life is your car and your apartment that you rent or the house that you buy, whatever, it's very hard to step over the other side and dedicate yourself to conservation where there's not that much money on offer. So by sort of giving up sometimes those material possessions allows you to go over and, hey, so for example, you take the crew on my ship here. So we've got a team that, ranges between people on the ship. No one gets paid on the ship. They're all volunteers. But, these people get to hang out on a ship that's visiting these cool places, that's doing this conservation work and doing working on a cause that these people, but they don't make any money. So at the end of the month, if they look at what have they managed to buy, nothing. They've consumed food,
right.
and they've had showers and consumed water and stuff like that. But at the end of the month, it's not like they've been able to invest in a new car or anything like that. But that's okay. Like, do I want to have a new car, or do I want to go and help save dolphins and turtles? Man, I'll save the dolphins and turtles.
I mean, for me, inside, like the payment for what we did while we were traveling is more than I could have made anywhere else doing anything else. That inside feeling of being fulfilled, it's amazing. When you're part of something, and every time we went out too, the campaigns were challenging in one way or the other.
Always.
Always a
Always.
challenge. Whether it's how are we going to get here today? But yeah, everything is a challenge, and so it's fun because there's always a lot of moving parts and things are always happening. But in the end, it's great because it's very rare that you find so much teamwork devoted to one cause, which is helping. and so there's that beautiful common denominator in a lot of the people, and we would go in, meet people that were doing conservation, meet other people doing conservation, and everybody had that same sort of perspective, which, you start to realize it's a huge global family. It's kind of an army, of
Yep.
advocates.
Yeah.
You know,
Here's something else that I think that I find sort of happens is involved in these campaigns where it's not easy. And I'll give you an example. Was at the moment on the ship, there's so we've sandblasted, we're painting it, so we cannot have any water going out the side of the ship. And so my crew can't have showers on the boat. They've got to go over to the showers over the other side, which are cold, so they don't get to have hot showers. And then this morning we get out of bed and we're on a shore supply here of power, so we're using the Mexican power grid, whatever. Power's off for like 6 or 8 hours in the day, and a couple of my crew are like, oh my god, I can't go and have my hot shower, and there's no power. I'm like, oh goodness, like if that is your biggest problem in the day, life is like really, really good. But it's sort of like when you've been dealing with these real challenging situations where, man, I may not make this through the night, or I'm getting eaten by mosquitoes and leeches in the swamp here. When the biggest problem today is that I don't have electricity and my cell phone's not working. What do you do? Like that's a pretty good life, but sometimes people struggle making that transition. And I find on volunteers on the ship, and if you go and talk to other NGOs that have camper pushed, one of the challenges is to get people who are tolerant of, you may not have electricity, you may not have running water, you might be shitting off the back of a ship because the sewage system in the boat is down, or those things. Often you take a lot of people, and I still see it on this boat. We get people on here, and they get upset over those things. And so part of the learning process is to say, hey, we need to have a real good perspective here, and let's think about this. Like, so we have no electricity at 4 PM. Well, look at sunny skies out there. Surfboard, go for a surf. It's Sunday, so a couple of the boys are going for a surf actually. So
nice. Yeah, nice water down there.
It looks pretty clean out there. It's not big, but it looks pretty clean. So they might be having a nice surf. But volunteer gig is not always easy, and often it's because you get volunteers on board who maybe are used to being able to have that running water, electricity on tap, good cell phone, good internet, all of those sort of things. You go on a ship that's crossing the Pacific, those things is all put to the side. Yeah. Anyway, I digress.
Well, no, I appreciate it. I was going to say, I know you've been talking for a while, longer than we even had figured we'd be talking here. There's so many things I could talk to you about. One thing I did want to do, though, is just, I've got people on chat, and I don't know if anybody maybe has any questions for Captain Pete. I can read them to him. It's the way the screen works. Glenn says hi from California. And
is that Glenn Grainer? I think Glenn Grainer's house is filling up with our stuff at the moment because we're down in Mexico, and it's quite tricky to get down here, and so it's all accumulating at Glenn's place at the moment.
So Glenn's ready, huh? He's ready to see you guys.
Yeah, I think we'll probably catch up with him in a couple of weeks. Actually, we'll probably head back up there and catch up with him. So,
cool.
It's one of the neat things about an organisation like Earthrace. You end up with this great network of people all over the globe, and sometimes you may not hear from someone for a couple of years or whatever, and then you're visiting, you're in London or you're in Porto in Portugal or somewhere, and there's always people coming out of the woodwork who say, hey, do you need a hand with something? I'd help with this. And I'm very blessed. I've got this neat family of people all over the world that is a resource that I can tap into, and it's people who maybe look at it and they may not come on campaign with Pete, but they might say, hey, like Pete and that team at Earthrace stuff, that's good stuff. I can put them up on my couch, or when they come into town, they can come down and volunteer on the boat for a couple of days, or come down and cook us dinner because my crews are working late fixing the engine or whatever it is. Yeah, I'm very blessed to have a very awesome family of people that come in and help out.
Awesome. Well, man, I'm excited to keep up with the Modoc and see what's going to happen, and see what kind of adventures you guys go on. And, and I really wanted to thank you for coming on today and talk about this. It's been great, so many different interesting topics, and to hear from somebody that's been in the field firsthand, actually picking a lot of this plastic out of the water, and now has a very good long-term plan to help fight the plastics. So yeah, just really appreciate it, man. Good to
All
talk
good,
to
man.
you.
It's been interesting watching you on your journey now too. You know, I mentioned before how a lot of people get into Sea Shepherd, and one of the great benefits is they move on and do their own thing. And it's interesting sort of having watched you sort of for a couple of years on and off, I guess. And you know, now you're sort of creating your own niche and
Yeah.
you know, starting your podcast, and you've done that little documentary about cancer. So you know, like all credit to you, and I wish you well with your podcast, and I hope you're successful in what you're pursuing, and much respect to you for stepping outside the square, man, and following.
Got to do it. Got to now do it on my own terms and do it in a way that helps. You know, I can't live. It's got to be for something bigger. So, and like I said, yeah.
How's your training going?
You know what? It's going great. I'm down at the gym down there, so I'm doing leg days. I'm doing arm days. It's funny. I was staying with my mom in West Virginia for a bit. There's no gym there, so I was walking up and down a hill and picking up rocks from her. You know, like picking up rocks and doing the rock workout like we used to do. You know, she would just, I think, look out the window at me and be like.
You should that people might remember this. You remember that tire when we were in the Philippines in that little island, and I had you throwing that tire over your head, and you were over it. And it's the funniest video I've ever seen you in. You were just over it. You should post that video in the comments. I think it's long gone out of my database, but for me, I think I might have posted that on Facebook or something actually. But oh my god, that was hilarious. But it's great to see that you've kicked on, and you know, it's all part of Eric E. Crown becoming a healthier being. You know, I think you've largely on top of your food and stuff, and the training I think was what was missing, and it's great that you've managed to kick on and keep the training. And it's hard, man. It's hard to front up day in day out and do it. So
and you gave me like a weird relationship. I love and hate my burpees, but I do them every workout now. And you know, it's the best thing, man. Because you know, when Pete and I were traveling, he got me into a health routine. I asked him. I said, help me. You know, so he would start to get me, and we would teach me how to work out, which is an important thing. Not everybody know how to do that. So a lot of times you might be running in circles when you think you're working out and being healthy. You know, but I learned so much, and it became a habit. And it was all about an approach to life. You know, a healthy approach, an approach of seeing things positively, seeing things forward, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And the journeys that we took were a huge impact, and what for me to bring me up to that point. So yeah, so it's
one of the great things that I think you kind of picked up on was there's always an excuse why you can't work out. And you know, hey, I don't have a gym. Well, you know, there's plenty of tires out there. There's rocks. There's a hill you can go and climb. You know, maybe I'll go for a paddle today, or you know, maybe I'll go and run up and down the hill and slip over in an ant's nest kind of thing.
Take my pants off and run down into the water.
But you can always come up with excuses why you can't train. But you know, if you think about it, there's always something you can go do to get in a work out of. Anyway.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much for being on here, man. It means a lot. It's great to be able to talk to you. We haven't talked in a bit. You've been busy. I've been busy, and anyway, it's great to catch up.
Oh, good, man. Yeah, it's been awesome to have a catch up, and wish you well with it, eh?
All right, man. Thanks. We'll talk to you
Yeah,
soon.
bro. Double safe.
See you, man.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys. So there we go. So that was Captain Pete, and I want to thank everybody for being here today. It was great to talk to him about things, you know, and it was very interesting. I found it very interesting, the aspect of, you know, you have to either work as a volunteer, work in a niche, work in your niche, or work in there we go, or work in some form of niche for yourself, or you know, find an NGO. So like for me, you know, when I was in Florida, I found a lot of people that just picked up the effort and said, let's go make a change. And anyway, it's very inspiring always. And I see that, wait, this comment sounds funny. Scott, oh yeah, I thought Eric was going to die. Scott, yeah, it's true. Man, I'll tell you, from the Philippines quickly. My first night out there, we're out on the water, and the first thing we have to do is jump onto a boat that's like this wide. And I got on there, and I got so sick. I think I ended up jumping back on the main boat, handing my camera to somebody, and just throwing up at the end of the end of the boat. So I'm a perfect example. You're not always great at what you do, but if your heart's in it, you get out there and can make it happen. Yeah, it's true. Pete did push me to the limit. But that's important because I didn't know my limit until I was able to get pushed past it. And believe me, between the Amazon and the Philippines, Cambodia, Vietnam, pushed me way past my limit, way past my comfort zone. It was a big one. It was definitely life changing. So yeah, it was fun though, man. I'll tell you, I miss those times. I really do. Always a good adventure. So anyway, I hope I hope it was interesting for everybody. And this is just the first in many podcasts. We'll be doing one every week, talking to different people around the world, having people Skype in. Pete's in Mexico right now. We're going to have people Skype in from around the world, show us where they are, what they're doing, what the front lines of conservation and the battle for a cleaner future look like. So thank you everybody for joining me today. And please, if you have other topics you want us to cover and you want me to get in touch with people, leave them in the comments. Make sure to, like I said, leave any topics or ideas you have down there. You can go to my website, ericecrown.com, subscribe to my YouTube channel, or you can just stay here on Facebook, and keep up with me. I have a newsletter on my website as well. So anyway, guys, it's good to talk to you, and this is our world. Let's talk about it. Thanks for joining me.